You probably think you know the story of Noah's Ark, right? Friendly animals marching 2 by 2 onto a big boat to escape a little bit of rain. It's a classic, a bedtime story we all know. But what if I told you the original story, the one in the source texts, is way darker and honestly, a lot more complex? Well, let's dive in and really unpack the story of Noah's Ark.
Yeah, it's this massive contrast, you see. On one hand, you've got the version from the picture books, but on the other, you have the actual text from Genesis, which describes a world that has become so unbelievably wicked that it calls for a divine response of, well, overwhelming judgment. We're talking about some heavy themes here: total corruption, divine grief, and a rescue that is anything but simple.
So, here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll look at the world that even made the flood necessary. Then we're going to get into the super mysterious Sons of God controversy. After that, we'll check out the incredible engineering of the Ark, uncover a hidden literary pattern in the story, see how it stacks up against other ancient myths, and finally, try to get to the heart of its ultimate meaning.
All right, so first things first. We have to set the stage. Why was something as drastic as a world-ending flood even on the table? Well, Genesis chapter 6 paints a picture of a world that had just completely spun out of control.
The text gives us a few really key details about this pre-flood world. First, humanity was booming, a massive population explosion. Second, people were living for an incredibly long time. I mean, we all know Methuselah, right? 969 years old. Just think about that for a second. With centuries to live, humanity had a long time to get creative and perfect new ways to be wicked.
And that brings us to one of the most chilling verses in the entire Bible. This isn't just talking about a few bad actions here and there. This is describing a fundamental, deep-seated corruption of the human heart. The text is so specific: every intent, only evil, continually. It's a picture of total depravity that the text says grieved God to his heart and set the stage for what was to come.
Okay, now we get to a really fascinating and kind of weird part of the story. It's a passage that has fueled centuries of intense debate, and it all revolves around this mysterious group called the Sons of God.
So here's the central question. Who exactly were these sons of God who started taking wives from the daughters of men? And what about their children, these mighty figures called the Nephilim? It's a Hebrew word that can be translated as the fallen ones. The sources give us 3 main theories.
So the first view is that this was a purely human problem. The idea is that the sons of God were the godly descendants of Adam's son Seth, but they started marrying women from the ungodly line of Cain. This spiritual compromise, this mixing of the lines, is what led to the total corruption of the human race.
Interpretation number 2 is a bit more political. It suggests that sons of God was a title for powerful kings or nobles, kind of like how ancient rulers were sometimes seen as divine. In this view, the great sin was a horrific abuse of power, with these despots just taking any woman they wanted for their harems, filling the world with violence and tyranny.
And then we have the third theory, which is by far the most dramatic. This one says the sons of God were actually fallen angels. In this view, these supernatural beings came down and had children with human women, a totally unnatural union that broke God's created order and produced this powerful hybrid offspring, the Nephilim.
As you can see, there's no slam-dunk answer here. The Sethaic view fits really nicely with the chapters right before it. The royalty view has some linguistic support, and the fallen angel view gets a boost because the phrase sons of God is used for angels elsewhere in the Old Testament and is even hinted at in the New Testament. But each one has its problems, which is exactly why people are still debating it thousands of years later.
So, regardless of the exact sin that tipped the scales, the result was a world facing judgment. But right in the middle of that darkness, God provides a way out, a means of salvation, the Ark.
And let me tell you, this was no little boat. The specs laid out in Genesis are absolutely mind-blowing. It was longer than a modern football field with enough internal volume to hold about 569 railroad boxcars. But check this out. The most amazing detail might be its proportions. That length-to-width ratio is what modern naval architects consider pretty much perfect for stability in violent seas. This thing was divinely engineered for survival.
So the Ark is the physical center of the story for sure, but the theological center, the real turning point, is something else, and you can actually find it hidden in the way the story itself is structured. It's so cool.
The flood story is written in a special literary form called a chiasm. It's like a mirror. The second half reflects the first half. You can see it right here. The numbers of days match up perfectly, like a count down and then a count up. The entire story builds and builds to one single central point, and then everything flows back down from it.
And that peak, the absolute turning point of the whole saga, isn't the rain or the waves. It's the phrase, "But God remembered Noah."
Now, in Hebrew, that word for remember, zachar, is so much more than just recalling something. It's an action word. When the Bible says God remembered Noah, it means he acted. He turned his attention to Noah and set the rescue in motion by sending a wind to push back the waters. So in this context, remembering is a powerful, divine act of mercy.
And then there's this tiny little phrase that adds another powerful layer. It says Noah and his family went into the ark, and then the Lord shut him in. They didn't just pull the door closed themselves. Their salvation wasn't entirely their own doing. It was an act of divine sealing, of protection from the storm raging outside.
Now, it's really important to know that the biblical flood story doesn't exist in a vacuum. There were actually a lot of similar flood stories circulating throughout the ancient Near East, and when you compare them to Genesis, it's incredibly revealing.
This right here, this is a piece of the Epic of Gilgamesh. When it was discovered back in 1872, it caused a global sensation. Why? Because it contained a detailed Mesopotamian flood story that had some shocking parallels to the account in Genesis. But as you'll see, the differences are even more important than the similarities. The biggest difference is the why, the motive. In Genesis, the flood is a direct divine judgment on profound moral evil. It has a clear ethical purpose. But in the Mesopotamian myths, like Gilgamesh, why did the gods wipe everyone out? Because humanity was too loud and was messing up their naps. I mean, the contrast couldn't be more stark, right? One is about justice, the other is about divine annoyance.
So, after all that, what do we take away? When you strip away the cute animals and the colorful rainbows and just look at the text, what is the core message of the flood?
This quote, for me, just nails it. It completely flips the script. Given the text's description of humanity's total wickedness, the real shock isn't the judgment. The truly stunning part of the story is the grace. It's the fact that in a world where everyone deserved condemnation, God chose to save anyone at all.
And that leaves us with one last thought to chew on. The story of Noah, at its heart, is about a divinely provided refuge from judgment. And so the question for us, thousands of years later, is this: what does that powerful idea mean for us today?